Out of Control, Episode 2, born on the 23rd. The first episode's done, the domain, we still got it, and we're doing this again. Gotta keep it going. Tonight we're going to look at a few different things. A week where physical media has taken a beating and a comeback? Maybe. The day that gave us both Sonic, the Nintendo 64, and Quake. Same date, multiple years apart. And a dive into my own 1998 archive that actually kind of proves all this, the big point about all this. The biggest game ever made is shipping with no disc, and stores, some of them, are refusing to stock it, thankfully. Xbox is about to cost $750. That's not great, is it? And a guy inside Sega wants to make all 4,500 Sega games playable before he retires. It probably won't happen, but good luck. And a quick reminder what all this is. So what is this? If you didn't tune in last week and you're not familiar with the website, well, Playing Out of Control Gaming is a retro and classic reviews, PC to Nintendo, every kind of system, present to the past, to the present. Founded with my buddy Dave back in 1998. We made a promise, it's not changed. No filters, just opinions. The fast version had a bunch of GeoCity sites, Sega sites, then Playing Out of Control Gaming started in 98. We kept it going, mutated a few times, lost the domain, but we got it back at this year, and we're pulling the original archive off of a stack of zip disks, floppy disks, CDs, and archive.org. So full story of this is in episode 1 if you want it. There's also some stuff on the website about it. But let's talk about this week. And this week the story is physical media. Who's killing it and who is quietly keeping it alive. So let's take a look at the news. Grand Theft Auto 6 is shipping with no disc. A code in a box. Digital only at launch. Pre-orders open this weekend, but you know, it drives me insane when people don't want to have physical copies anymore. 2 stores are refusing to stock it at least. Video Games Plus in Canada, which, you know, a lot of us buy some of our specialty games for us because they have a lot of the classic games that are being remastered and things like that. And then Lootbox Gaming in Delaware, which does a lot of the same stuff. So it's not the big carriers. It's not Best Buy or, you know, Walmart, places like that are cutting their GameStop. It's a little couple of the smaller retailers. There is a rumor that there's going to be a disc version in December. It's just a kind of a rumor. It's kind of what we're hearing. May or may not happen. We'll see. You know, you can still buy a physical copy of the game, but you know, the physical copy of the game is just an empty box or empty case. So you know, it's kind of like buying one of these games back here and it just being empty. So why would you buy a piece of plastic? It's kind of how like PC games went there for a while before they all went digital, and it's not a great thing. But we did see some interesting news this week that physical is not dead. For the first time since 2009, I think it was, spending on physical games went up in the United States. 3%, $1.6 billion. Now, to be honest, pretty much all of that's the Switch 2. Everything else is still falling. And this increase is probably just temporary. But, you know, vinyl and CD sales are also up this year. And they don't have a Switch 2. So there's a new generation of people that want physical copies of stuff. We're tired of having digital only. And then when the internet's out, hurricanes come or things happen, government regulations, you can't have them. And you can't sell what you don't have either. You know, if you have just a digital copy and it goes away, what do? We saw that just this week with the PlayStation Network removing all these movie films from it. And if you bought the film, you just lost it. You know, hundreds of films gone. You might have spent hundreds of dollars on those films for your digital collection. Gone. So people still want to buy discs, and I think when you're selling the discs and the actual games are on the disc, people seem to buy them. But here comes the worst part. The machines that played the discs, they're kind of getting out of reach now, right? On August 1st, Xbox is raising prices. The Series X is now $749 for the digital model, $800 for a disk drive, and the 2 terabyte model's gone. The reason, storage and memory cost 2.5 times what they used to do, they said, you know, and it's true. I'm in IT. Memory costs are crazy. And they expect that to double again. So the problem is today's $700 console is tomorrow's retro platform that nobody can afford, right? I mean, and there's not going to be any games for them. So I mean, it's like gaming may die with us, right? It may be gone here soon. So there may not be any future in owning a game here soon. But there are some people that are fighting to keep keep this. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a Sega veteran. He wants to save all of Sega. His name is Yosuke Okanari, and he's been at the company since 1994. And he is cataloging every Sega title, about 2,800 Sega titles, and 4,500 if you count everything, including the third-party ones. And he wants them all playable on modern hardware. And he admits he will probably retire before it's done. But if anybody's allowed to be excited about this, I am, because listen, I love Sega. I'd love to have all their games, and it's hard to collect them all on retro consoles nowadays. Some of them are just out of print, or some of them work very high in print, and it's hard to find some of them. Some of them are really, really expensive to get, and some of the Sega CD games and Saturn games, they've deteriorated, and you can't find them. You can't get working copies. So this would be great if we can do this. A couple quick wins this week. The original arcade version of Tekken just hit the arcade archives, and it's legal, playable, and preserved. There's a Castlevania off the Nintendo 64 that's got recompiled to run on native on PC this week, so that's great. And then there's an unreleased Barbie game from 1994, I think, for the Genesis and the Sega, or Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And that's finally coming out as part of a Barbie remaster release set from Digital and Atari. And also the source code for Arma, Cold War Assault, got released this week. So there's going to be some fun stuff people have to do with that. Now, we talked about the wins. Let's talk about the losses. The European Union will not require game preservation, they said. On June 16th, the EU Commission said it cannot make companies keep games playable after they shut them down. So, I don't know what we're going to do about that. But so, that's after I think it was 3 million people signed the Stop Killing Games petition. I mean, we keep fighting on. There's a lot of games that have been removed from platforms, delisted, all this other stuff, and they get shut down the servers, and you paid $60-$70 for a game, and you can never play it again. And some games have been brought back, like Marvel Heroes recently, and you've got Asheron's Call and City of Heroes, and a lot of other games like that were shut down that have came back due to fan projects and things like that. So that's a good feature, but we've got to try to save some of these games. They're just going to be history footnotes, soon, and nobody will ever have them. So on to some even worse news. A lot of games were delisted this week. SOS Ops, a fun co-op game from 2024, just got pulled off the PlayStation Store, and it's leaving GOG in July 1st. It sold 800,000 copies, and it's being pulled. I mean, it's just crazy. Planet of the Apes: Last Frontier from 2017 got quietly pulled too this past week. Even good, recent games, they just vanish. A couple other quick notes of news. The EverDrive GBA Pro just got reviewed. So flashcards matter. Retroid has a new 4x3 OLED handheld coming out. And there's a new beat 'em up Metro Siege game coming out on the Neo Geo with real cartridges. And a brand new Sega Genesis game coming out called The Wallaby, where no generative AI is used. It's coming out as well. This week in POCG history. Alright, so I pulled these straight off the Restored Archive, the actual POCG site from 1998 and 1999. And if we look back to June 25th, 1998, here's a couple news stories from then. It's kind of one touch base. These are things that I've been recovering from a zip disk and archive.org and stuff. And so 28 years ago to the week, you know, we see some of these stories coming out. So if you were there, you remember it. That Windows 98 released, right? The big box software of a generation. I mean, 95 was big, but 98 was the biggest, because it's every other year for a good Windows, right? And this is an era of the beige tower, the big box of software stuff, and this is I actually have a new series I just started on this called The Beige Years, and we'll talk some about that first episode on that. It actually dropped today, and you can see it, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But on that same day, June 25th, the StarCraft demo dropped. And you know what? You didn't get that demo on a disc. You downloaded it off an FTP site, off the ZDNet, Launchpad, or dial up if you had patience. Uh, because it wasn't until September or October that CD versions started arriving on some of the magazines. Now, the strange thing about that is, back then it felt like magic that you could download a game. You didn't have to wait months for a CD version for PC Gamer or Computer Gaming Weekly to come out, with a new magazine, with a new game. You didn't have to wait. But now, you get an empty case that gives you a code to download a game. And, the benefit back then was you had a choice. Now we've lost that choice. So one felt like a gift, one feels like a warning. And then June 28, 1998, also Sony announced a game called Fantasy War, an online-only strategy game on Sony Service to Station. And here's the thing about Fantasy War. It's gone. You can't play it. Hardly nothing on the internet even exists about the game. There's very scarce news pieces out there, including one of ours. I mean, that's the only proof it ever even existed. And as for the station, it had 1.3 million users at one time, but Sony shut the station down. And remember the news we did earlier? 1.3 million people tried to sign the Stop Killing Games thing. Kind of number keeps coming back on us right here. It's just one of those odd coincidences. But, it's just those games, like I said, there was no way to back them up back then. They're gone too. So, and I wanted to look at one review too we did back then, since I think it was good to throw in some new reviews as well. Shepard, one of our writers, wrote a review on F-22 Lightning 3. He reviewed it for the original POCG. He was one of our original writers. And back in 1999, he gave that game a 4 out of 5, a great score. And we just put that review up on the website after pulling it back out of the off a zip disk. And so, but here's the punchline. The thing that Shepard loved most about that game was its online multiplayer. 128 players at once on a service called Nova World. Guess what? Nova World's gone too. And so is that 128 player multiplayer. So is what it is, right? So we wrote about all these: Windows 98, StarCraft, Fantasy War, F-22, and some of these games right now you can't physically play them anymore. You can't. One of them you can't even find it. I mean, it was an online only game and it doesn't even exist at all, and there's hardly any news sources about it. So that's kind of this whole show in a breath. That these games they disappear if no one cares about them and no one cares about the history. What's the point? And so that's what I do this to show you the history, to tell you about preservation, to keep beating the drums, as saying let's preserve these games, let's give a good ability to keep playing games. I hate to see things lost. I hate to see history lost. So that kind of leads us into one of our features, and that's about that new series I told you about, the Beige Years. And that feature is about a game called Myst, in the first episode. And I mentioned a new piece, and here it is. So the new series, like I said, is called the Beige Years. It's about beige box PC error, DOS, Windows 95, Windows 98, the literal beige towers, as PC grew up, kind of similar to that beige repro case up there on the shelf. And the first one, like I said, is about Myst. So let me take you back. 1995. I'm a kid. I'm getting my first computer, my first family big computer, and it's a Packard Bell Legend with a CD-ROM drive. Got it for Christmas. My stepdad Wayne, who I mentioned some in that first episode, he did everything he could for me, and he kind of shaped this whole website and everything about it. And one of the things, I received a ton of different games with that PC, but one of them was Myst. Now, Myst came in this big box here. This is the box that I got. And not only inside this box was a game, a jewel case, right, with actual games CDs in there, but you actually got books, like this, the Journal of Mist, a little gray booklet bound that you could write notes in here. You see this, like how to make suits, settings, things that you could do in here. You would just kind of, write down what was going on. So games don't come like this anymore, right? You don't have these little booklets, and you don't have, we don't have books at all hardly in games anymore, and you don't get, physical boxes like this anymore. You don't get these props, these in-universe artifacts, unless you're buying like a super expensive collector's edition and you get some kind of statue or something. But Cyan, who made the game, made a handmade feeling objects in the game, and a book that you could write down, strategy into and stuff. And honestly, and I needed that book because the deal is, me and Mist never clicked. My stepdad helped me as much as he could, but I was a kid raised on Nintendo and Sega reflexes, and Mist wanted me to have patience and wanted you to slow down and me to slow down, and I still struggle with that. But I still have the box. I still have that game. I can still pull this off the shelf, open up this CD here, throw it in the CD drive on one of my Windows 98 computers, and play it. And I still keep the game. The reason I kept it, it has sentimental value to me because of who gave it to me. And because that's my stepdad that gave me that game and put it on the shelf. And, you don't get that like with the digital games now. And so, I just think about that, like, looking at this game, which was one of the biggest games in history for a long time, right? That comparing it to like what's going to be the biggest game of the 2026 and probably of all time, that doesn't come with even a disc or anything in a box. And you get a game here that had a box, had a manual, had ads, it had a journal, all this other stuff. And that's the kind of the argument right there between how things used to be and how they are now. Not saying one way's better or worse, you can make your own decision on that. But for me, I prefer to have the physical items. But if you want to read about that, the whole piece is up now at pocg.net, and it's under the editorial section. There's a whole Bezier section now. Now, something else I wanted to look at, I thought I love physical media. And so I wanted to do a little bit of series. You'll see behind me, I've got a lot of books. We've got hundreds and hundreds of books here, me and my wife. And this series is called On the Shelf. And today I want to look at a book called Console Wars. Console Wars is it's a really great book. Probably one of the best computer books I've read. Not computer, but video game books I've read. Detailing this stuff. And so starting, with this episode here a couple times a month, we'll go over some books, some great video game tie-in books, or books about the video game era, or competitions and things like that. Just a whole bunch of stuff. But this book, Console Wars, is by Blake Harris. He wrote it, I think, in 2014, and it's about kind of the exact war we're going to be getting into in this episode, Sega versus Nintendo. And so, that's in the 90s, it was Sega versus Nintendo, right? There really wasn't anybody else in it till Sony got into it later. And so this book is kind of the source of the story I'm going to tell you in a minute. And I recommend this book. It's a great read. It's fun. It's fast. It reads like a thriller. It's got some movie elements into it. If you care about this kind of stuff even a little bit, read it. There's also a documentary/movie available online that you can watch. It's pretty good. But I'll give you the catch, and this has been pointed out by a number of people. Console Wars calls itself a nonfiction novel, and it is. But some of the dialogue in here is reconstructed according to a number of sources. Some of it may be edited to play a little bit stronger, and most of it leans on Tom Kalinske, the CEO of Sega of America, who ran that. It's on his word. I think he's the one that gave most of the interviews and things like that. And so, this is more of a story almost of him than anything else. The New York Times and the AV Club both called that out and mentioned that in some of their reviews of this. But irregardless, I enjoyed the book. And I think anyone that reads it will enjoy it. But some of these big cinematic movie scene moments in the book, maybe just don't treat those as gospel truths. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. Because one of the best stories in that book, it runs right into our main event about Sonic and the Nintendo 64. So now here's the whole thing that this episode's about. This whole thing that I wrote this whole episode to be around. And that was June 23rd. So in June 23rd, Sonic the Hedgehog launched in North America. Changed lives for everybody. Like that. Any gamer, we never had anything that played that fast. It was just crazy. So 35 years ago, right? Well, fast forward 5 years, and Nintendo 64 launches in Japan on the same day, June 23rd, 1996. So that's 30 years. So same calendar day, 5 years apart. Sega got its mascot, and 5 years to the day later, Nintendo got the revenge with a new machine that let them dominate Sega once again. So, two sides of the same war, just on the same date, just years apart. So let me take each one of them one at a time. So let's look at Sonic. 35 years for Sonic. June 23rd, 1991, before Sonic, Sega did not really have a face. I mean, they tried Alex Kidd, right? And I've got a review of one of the Alex Kidd games on the Master System on this website, and it's a fun game. Alex Kidd's kind of cool, but he was no Sonic, and he couldn't compete with Mario. He didn't have the speed, the attitude, none of the stuff that Sonic would eventually have. But he just wasn't that. Sega needed something. They needed, a face that could compete against Nintendo. But when they created Sonic, they ended up with one of the coolest faces in the business, right? The speed, the attitude, it created a whole set of advertisement campaigns, rings, loops. And so this game built by the Sonic team with Yuji Naka programming it was a direct shot at Mario. And Sega even decided to make this a pack-in America. The game came to America first, which was a major thing because, Tom Kalinske and SOA, they really pushed to have this game here. They saw something in it, and they helped develop it and push the art direction, and they saw something that this game could give them. And so this game came in the box for a lot of versions of the console. And so this one is personal for me. You heard it on episode 1 that I was a Sega Master System kid. My dad had bought me one of those. Then I went to a Sega Genesis, and I was in love with the Sega Genesis. I played in the Blockbuster World Championships for the Sega Genesis, and Sonic was right at the center of my my Sega life. Sonic is like he's right there, and so here's what gets me. 35 years on, Sonic, he probably shouldn't have made it. I mean, as many mistakes as Sega has made. And he's had some really rough years, right? When they went to 3D with the Saturn, and all the spin-offs that nobody asked about. He really shouldn't have made it, but he's got some great new games now, Sonic, and he's a whole generation. This is my cat widget. He's he's done advertisements, they've got movies, branding deals. Sonic has had it all. I mean, up until recently with the new Nintendo movies, Sonic was better than Mario and more popularity recently. So, that's kind of changed now with some of those new Nintendo movies with Mario, Super Mario Brother, and everything. But Sonic, he's really made it and kept going. And so this week, this cat here made me get distracted, but anyway, this week we had some people trying to cash in, and I love the company that's trying to do this, but they've made a new Sonic remaster. It's not a remaster, it's a repressing of the Sonic for the Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 for the Genesis. And so they're wanting $100 for these games. I mean, and that's nice. I appreciate them remastering it, but those games are super cheap for the most part. You can get like I've got a Sonic 2 copy right here, full set, complete in box, and I got it for like $15 on eBay. I'm not going to spend $100 on a Sonic copy, Sonic 2, set. Remember that story we were talking about earlier about the Sega veteran trying to make all 4,500 games playable? This is exactly the catalog he's fighting to keep alive, right? All these Sonic games, and that's the great thing about Sonic. It really did some great things for Sega. But having said that, let's look at the Nintendo 64, 30 years ago. June 23rd, 1996, Japan. This is the machine that went head to head with the Saturn. If you were a Sega guy like me, you bet on the Saturn. And so you think I'd say, he don't have anything to say about the Nintendo 64. Well, honestly, back then I didn't. I was a Saturn kid. Me and my cousin both got Saturns. And I had picked my side, and my side was Sega, the way it always was for a while there. But I watched the Nintendo 64 hype roll in. Mario 64, the weird three-prong controller that none of us ever seen anything like that with the analog stick. And I told myself, man, the Saturn's just going to be a better system than this. And, the Saturn had some sporting games and things like that. But the reality was the Saturn was getting buried. And I knew it even then. The weird thing about the 64 was everyone I knew had one, but I didn't. I would go to friends' houses and we would play it. And it was so fun. I mean, there was just so much more fun of a system to play, especially with people, right? You could play 4 players, and Saturn had Wave Race 64 and Pilot Wing 64 and Mario Kart and Mario World, and all these great things and amazing games, stuff you just didn't really have on the Saturn. The Saturn has some great sports games, and the Saturn has some great some RPGs and things like that, Japanese style, but the 64 was the more fun console. So no, the 64 was not my console, but I really did like it. But here's the story of Sega and Nintendo and the 64 and how those two come together. This is kind of what I mentioned some about in the Console Wars book. Sega of America wanted to build the next console around a chip from Silicon Graphics, SGI, the workstation computer people. And Tom Klinsky and his team, they saw it and they loved the chip that they saw from SGI. And they flew Sega of Japan's hardware engineers over to look at it. And Sega Japan said no. So SGI took their technology to Nintendo instead, and it became the brain of the Nintendo 64. Pretty much that's the truth. And Tom Klinsky and others in Nintendo have admitted that themselves. But here's the part, like the Console Wars book that I mentioned, that some of it's kind of amps it up a little bit, dresses it up. In Console Wars, it's kind of like a movie scene. Klinsky basically hands SGI Nintendo phone number, and Klinsky actually said in his own interview that we just told him to go call it the companies. He never mentioned saying Nintendo. We never gave Nintendo their the number to Nintendo's development team or anything like that. And it was also most likely not going to be for the Saturn that they wanted that chipset. They were looking at the machine after the Saturn. And that's kind of really why Sega of Japan says that they passed for those reasons. But that's really anyone's guess for why Sega really passed. Klinsky says the chip was too big and too expensive to manufacture. Nintendo, said that Sega demanded it to be exclusive and would not budge. It's something people still argue about today on both sides. I'm not going to tell you which way it is for sure. All I know is the book made it out pretty cool. And the big picture is, the Nintendo 64, the machine that fought against the Saturn, the system I liked, won. And the Saturn or Sega's other, console or whatever could have been running on that chip instead if Sega hadn't said no. So 5 years to the day after Sonic, you can't write it any better than that. I know that the Sega or the Nintendo Japan team, they probably did that on purpose, that they rolled out the Nintendo 64. Look, I rooted against it, but I know exactly what it meant for most of you. I asked some people for their memories on the 64, and they sent them in, and everybody I know said that they loved the 64. They may have not had a 64 themselves, but they had somebody that had it, and they spent a lot of time on the couch because it's a 4-controller system. 4 controllers, a couch, and the whole Saturday's gone. People just love that, and there's still a love for that because 8-Bit Dough just put out a brand new 64 anniversary controller system, with the keyboard and everything. It's not for the Nintendo 64, but it's Nintendo 64 themed, and it looks great. And if people didn't love the Nintendo 64, we wouldn't have stories like the one about the Castlevania story from earlier, where someone's porting these Nintendo 64 games and recompiling them onto PC. That same kind of preservation is what keeps these machines alive in our memory now. I mean, people love these machines. They want to keep it alive. And the console war's over. But the new war is, keeping games playable. That's the new war. But I don't want to leave out my friends here, the PC gamers. And I'm a PC gamer these days. And really was there for a long time. And there's another game that had a birthday in that same time period. Not on the 23rd, the day before it, right? And that's Quake. So, June 22nd, 1996, PC gamers got Quake from id Software. The console war always had a PC front, and this was the flag in the ground for the PC front. True 3D, online deathmatch, 9-Inch Nail soundtrack. I mean, this game changed everything in the PC world. And I mean everything. Quake is the big reason 3D graphics cards became something you had to have in your PC. It's the root of online deathmatch culture, the mod scene of the whole competitive shooter world. I mean, heck, Dave started playing out of control clan based around Quake games, and we still have Quake 2 matches, every Tuesday night. So half the games you played, in the last 30 years have a little bit of Quake's DNA in them, whether you may know it or not. But the sad thing is, if you remember last week's episode about the layoffs we talked about, well, id Software is one of those studios caught up in all that. The people who gave us Doom, Quake, and Wolfenstein, the retro royalty, some of them are losing their jobs right now in 2026. And this week, some of the people that built Quake, they looked back on it, and talked about it. And John Carmack said it perfectly, that it came together almost perfectly, but at a grim cost. And that's kind of where we're at again, right? Some of these games that have come out and really worked together great, they've come at a lot of hardship, and it's kind of broken the team because the teams get shut down later. And Sandy Peterson said the same thing, that that they had pretty much crunched for months and that it spiritually killed them. So the next time a classic just appears and we all act like it was easy to make, or remember the games we love, they have a price, and a lot of these guys are paying a really big price making these games because it's really tough on their families, because the studios get shut down, they lose their jobs after the game comes out, and most of the time we don't really see what they go through. All right, here's my question for you this week. Same date, 5 years apart, Sonic in 91, Nintendo is 96. Which one was your favorite? Or were you more like my buddy Dave, and your memory from this time period is the launch of Quake? So what meant more to you? Be honest with me. Were you a Sega kid, a Nintendo kid, or were you a PC gamer? I came up on Sega. You already knew that. But tell me your side. I'll read it all. I love to read comments and everything. We got a forum on the website. Everything's on POCG.net. New this week, the first base year's piece on Myst. Restored 1998, 99 archives, the F-22 review. You can find us on Blue Sky, Mastodon, Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit. Coming up next week, we're going to look at probably the next episode of the Beige Years that I've already wrote, and that's about demo discs in the magazine CD era. And so we'll see that. We'll talk about the StarCraft demo a little bit. Might play that off of one of those discs, and we'll talk about some more restored reviews we've got, some more restored news, and we got a couple handheld reviews coming up, and got some great handhelds. They're not brand new and everything, but they're new to us, and show you how to really pick up a handheld and play some of these older games. So anyway, it's great. Glad you guys could tune in, and if you have any comments or anything, just leave us a message. Thank you.